The room fell silent as the words left my husband's mouth. "Oh, she's just the nanny," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. 20 years of marriage reduced to 5 careless words. I stood frozen, champagne flute in hand, as his colleagues nodded and shifted their attention elsewhere. In that moment, I decided Richard would learn exactly who I was and what I was capable of. I'd met Richard Caldwell when we were both 25. I was finishing my MBA with a concentration in investment finance, and he was starting as a junior executive at Meridian Consulting. We married a year later, and when our twins arrived unexpectedly early in our marriage, we made what I thought was a mutual decision. I would put my career on hold to raise our children while Richard climbed the corporate ladder. "It's just for a few years," he had promised. "Then you can go back and do whatever you want." Those few years stretched into 15. Somewhere along the way, Richard's perception of me changed. The woman he had once admired for her financial acumen and business instincts had disappeared in his eyes, replaced by someone who existed only to manage his household and raise his children. I sipped my champagne and smiled politely at the company Christmas party, just as I had for 15 years. Meridian Consulting had grown dramatically during Richard's tenure as CFO, and these annual celebrations had grown increasingly lavish. This year's event was being held at the Blackwell Hotel, where crystal chandeliers reflected off marble floors and wait staff circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that cost more than our weekly grocery budget. "Excuse me," I said to no one in particular, setting down my glass and walking toward the restroom. I needed a moment alone. In the elegant bathroom, I gripped the marble countertop and stared at my reflection. At 45, I still looked good, better than good if I was being honest. My dark hair was styled in a sleek bob that framed my face, and the black dress I'd chosen for tonight highlighted my figure, which I'd maintained through years of early morning runs before the kids woke up. But what I saw in my eyes bothered me: resignation. When had I accepted becoming invisible? The bathroom door swung open, and Melanie Chin walked in. As Meridian's HR director, she was one of the few executives I'd come to know well over the years. "Caroline, I was looking for you," she said, her expression concerned. I overheard what Richard said. "Are you okay?" I straightened my shoulders. "I've been better." Melanie checked under the stalls to ensure we were alone. "That was completely inappropriate. You have an MBA from Wharton, for God's sake. You managed portfolios at Goldman before the twins. Ancient history, apparently." I reapplied my lipstick with a steady hand. "Not to mention you've been secretly managing his investments for years." Melanie was the only person who knew about my financial activities. We'd become friends when our children attended the same elementary school, long before she joined Meridian. I gave her a warning look. "That's not something I advertise." When Richard had received his first substantial bonus 8 years ago, he'd been so absorbed in his corporate success that he'd simply handed me the check and asked me to put it somewhere. Instead of depositing it into our joint savings account, as he'd assumed, I'd opened a separate investment account. I'd analyzed market trends, researched emerging companies, and made calculated investments. Each year, when the bonus came, I added to the portfolio. Richard never asked about the money. His attention was always on the next deal, the next promotion. "How much is it up to now?" Melanie asked. "Just over 2 million. I said it matter-of-factly, though the number still sometimes surprised even me. Melanie's eyes widened. "And he has no idea." "He knows the account exists, but he thinks it's just a savings account with maybe a few $100,000. He's never bothered to look at the statements I file away." "Caroline," Melanie said slowly, "maybe it's time he found out exactly what you've been doing all these years." I considered her words. The twins were now in college, Sophia studying biochemistry at MIT, and James pursuing film at NYU. The nest was empty. The excuses had run out. "You know what? You're right," I said, a plan already forming. "But not tonight. I want to do this properly." Melanie's smile turned mischievous. Good, because Richard's about to announce the executive bonuses, and word is he's getting a big one this year. We returned to the party just as Richard tapped a knife against his glass, calling for attention. I watched him from across the room. Still handsome at 47, his dark hair showing distinguished streaks of silver at the temples. He stood with the confidence of a man who believed he'd built his success entirely on his own. First, he announced, I want to thank everyone for another record-breaking year. Meridian has exceeded all projections, and our clients couldn't be happier. Applause rippled through the crowd. I clapped along, observing the admiration on the faces of his colleagues. And I'm pleased to announce that the board has approved an exceptional bonus structure this year. Executive bonuses will be distributed next week, just in time for Christmas. More applause, more congratulatory handshakes. I caught Melanie's eye across the room, and she gave me a subtle nod. 3 days later, I was in my home office, really just a corner of our bedroom where I kept my laptop, when I heard Richard's key in the door. I quickly closed the browser tabs displaying investment analyses and portfolio projections. Caroline, Richard called out. Upstairs, I answered, smoothing my sweater as I stood to greet him. He appeared in the doorway, his expression triumphant. It came through, he said, waving an envelope. Biggest bonus yet. The board was impressed with the Davis acquisition. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely happy for him. Despite the growing distance between us, I'd never begrudged him his success. How much? 800,000. He loosened his tie. I thought we might use some of it to renovate the kitchen. You've been asking for new countertops, right? I nodded, taking the envelope he held out. Inside was a check with an amount that could change someone's life. To Richard, it was countertops and appliances. I was thinking, I said carefully, that we might invest most of it like we did with the others. Richard waved dismissively. Sure, whatever you think. Just make sure we keep enough liquid for the renovation. He was already turning away, heading to the shower. That night, as Richard slept beside me, I finalized my plan. I would need 3 months to execute it properly, and when I was done, there would be no more just the nanny comments, ever again. The first step was setting up a meeting with our financial advisor, or rather, Richard's financial advisor. Frank Wilson had been managing Richard's retirement accounts and stock options for years, though he had limited insight into our overall financial picture since I handled our personal investments separately. Mrs. Caldwell, this is an unexpected pleasure, Frank said as his assistant showed me into his downtown office the following week. Is Richard joining us? Not today, Frank. I wanted to discuss something with you privately. Frank's eyebrows rose slightly. Of course. What can I help you with? I placed a folder on his desk. I'd like to consolidate our investments. Richard's company investments, his retirement accounts, and the separate account I've been managing. Frank opened the folder and began reviewing the statements I'd printed. His expression shifted from professional interest to surprise as he flipped through the pages. These returns are impressive, he said, studying the numbers. Who's been managing this account? I have. Frank looked up sharply. You personally selected these investments. Every single one. He returned to the statements, examining them more carefully. Some of these positions you got in early on Nexus Biotech before their cancer drug approval, and Quantum Solutions before the government contract announcement. He looked at me with new respect. This isn't lucky investing, Mrs. Caldwell. This is skilled analysis. I do have an MBA in finance, I said, and I've kept up with the markets. Frank nodded, still processing. Does Richard know about this? Not really. He's been busy with his own career, but I'd like to surprise him with a full portfolio review. Can you help me prepare a comprehensive presentation? Something suitable for a board meeting. Frank smiled slowly. I'd be delighted. Over the next 2 months, I met with Frank regularly. We consolidated accounts, optimized tax positions, and prepared detailed analyses of our complete financial picture. The portfolio I'd built had outperformed most professional managers, and Frank didn't try to hide his admiration. "You know," he said during our final planning meeting, "Meridian's investment division is always looking for talent. With this track record, you'd be a valuable addition." I smiled. "That's very kind, but I have other plans for now." Those plans were moving forward in parallel with the financial consolidation. I'd enrolled in a certification program to update my financial credentials and had begun quietly networking with former colleagues from my Goldman days. Many had risen to senior positions, and more than a few expressed interest when I mentioned I might be returning to the field. At home, subtle changes were taking place as well. I started dressing differently, not dramatically, but replacing my casual mom wardrobe with more professional attire. I spoke up more about business topics at dinner, offering informed opinions on market trends and corporate strategies. Richard seemed vaguely surprised but didn't comment directly. The twins noticed the change during their spring break visit home. "Mom, you seem different," Sophia observed as we prepared dinner together. "More like you were when we were little, before you went full-time PDA." I smiled, chopping vegetables with practiced efficiency. "How so?" "I don't know. More present? Like you're fully engaged with your own life instead of just managing ours." "Well, you two are building your own lives now. It's time for me to remember who I was before I became just your mother." James looked up from setting the table. "You were never just our mother." "Tell that to your father," I murmured, then immediately regretted it. Both twins exchanged glances. They weren't blind to the dynamics in our marriage, but I'd always been careful not to criticize their father in front of them. "Is everything okay between you and Dad?" James asked carefully. I set down my knife. "Your father and I are at a crossroads. We've spent 20 years building his career and raising you two. Now it's time to figure out what the next 20 years look like." "And what do you want them to look like?" Sophia asked. I considered the question. I want to be recognized for all of who I am, not just the parts that are convenient for others to see. The conversation shifted to their studies, but that night, after the twins had gone out with friends, Richard brought it up. "The kids think something's wrong between us," he said, loading the dishwasher, a task he'd rarely bothered with before. "Is there?" I countered, wiping down the countertop. Richard paused, a plate in his hand. "You tell me. You've been different lately." "Different how?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Distant? Busier? You're always on your laptop or on the phone." "I've been working on something." "What kind of something?" I turned to face him directly. "Something I should have done years ago. But we can talk about it after the twins go back to school." Richard studied me for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But whatever it is, we're okay, right?" The question held a note of vulnerability I hadn't heard from him in years. For a moment, I glimpsed the man I'd married, the one who had once seen me as an equal partner, not just a supportive accessory to his success. "We will be," I answered truthfully, "one way or another." After the twins returned to school, I finalized preparations for what I'd come to think of as my reemergence. Frank had prepared a comprehensive financial presentation. I'd completed my certification program, and I'd scheduled conversations with 3 investment firms interested in my portfolio management skills. The catalyst came in late April, when Richard announced that Meridian was hosting a spring gala for clients and executives. "Should I have my blue suit cleaned, or is the gray one better?" he asked, standing in front of his closet. "The blue," I answered. "And I'll need to shop for a new dress." Richard turned, his expression surprised. "You're coming? I thought these events bored you." "Not this time," I said. "This one's important." The evening of the gala arrived, and I took particular care with my appearance. The dress I'd chosen was a deep emerald that complemented my eyes and projected confident sophistication. My makeup was flawless, my hair styled by the same salon that serviced Meridian's female executives. When I descended the stairs, Richard stared. "Wow," he said simply. "You look incredible." "Thank you," I replied, gathering my clutch. "Shall we?" The Meridian Spring Gala was being held at the Botanical Gardens, with the main reception in the glass conservatory. As we entered, heads turned, not just toward Richard, as usual, but toward me as well. "Richard, there you are," called Marcus Bennett, Meridian's CEO. He approached with his wife, Angela. "And Caroline, you look stunning tonight." "Thank you, Marcus," I said, accepting his kiss on the cheek. "Angela, that dress is magnificent on you." As we exchanged pleasantries, I noticed Richard watching me with an odd expression, part pride, part confusion. Throughout the cocktail hour, I circulated confidently, engaging in conversations about market trends and industry developments. My years of reading financial journals and analyzing investments had kept me more informed than anyone realized. Several of Richard's colleagues seemed surprised by my knowledge, which only fueled my determination. The moment I'd been waiting for came when Marcus called for everyone's attention to make announcements before dinner. After recognizing several client relationships and team achievements, he paused. "And finally, I'm excited to announce a new initiative at Meridian. We're launching a specialized investment group focusing on sustainable technologies and ethical investing. Our clients have been requesting this, and after tonight's discussions with a potential new team member, I'm more convinced than ever that we're on the right track." My heart raced. This wasn't part of my plan, but it aligned perfectly. After the announcements, as we moved toward the dinner tables, Richard touched my elbow. "What was Marcus talking about? Who's the potential team member?" Before I could answer, Melanie appeared at my side. "Caroline, Marcus is asking for you. He wants to continue your discussion from earlier." Richard's brow furrowed. "What discussion?" I handed him my champagne glass. "I'll tell you everything later. Save my seat." As I walked away with Melanie, I could feel Richard's confusion radiating behind me. "Are you ready for this?" Melanie asked under her breath. "More than ready," I replied. "It's time." Marcus was waiting in a small meeting room off the main conservatory, along with Frank Wilson and the head of Meridian's investment division, Patricia Locke. All three looked up expectantly as I entered. "Caroline," Marcus said warmly, "I've been reviewing the portfolio information Frank shared, with your permission, of course, and I'm impressed. Patricia has some questions about your investment strategy, if you don't mind." For the next 20 minutes, I explained my approach to portfolio management, my research methodologies, and my market analyses. Patricia's questions were technical and specific, designed to test not just my knowledge, but my thought process. When we finished, Patricia nodded approvingly. "Your returns speak for themselves, but your strategic thinking is equally impressive. We should continue this conversation officially next week." "I'd like that," I said. "And I have some ideas about the sustainable investment initiative you mentioned." "Excellent," Marcus said, standing. "Let's rejoin the party before people start missing us." As we returned to the main conservatory, I spotted Richard at our assigned table, deep in conversation with the company's legal counsel. His face was flushed with alcohol or agitation, I couldn't tell. I was halfway across the room when he looked up and saw me approaching with Marcus, Patricia, and Frank. His expression shifted from confusion to dawning realization. The time for pretending was over. After years of being introduced as Richard's wife, or mistaken for just the nanny, I was ready to be seen for who I truly was. Caroline Caldwell, financial strategist, investment manager, and force to be reckoned with. Richard stood as I approached, his eyes asking 1,000 questions. I took a deep breath, prepared to answer every one of them, on my terms. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Yes," I agreed. "We certainly do." "Not here," I said, keeping my voice low. "After dinner." Richard nodded stiffly, pulling out my chair. As I sat down, I noticed several curious glances from others at our table. Executives and their spouses who had known us for years but were clearly sensing a shift in dynamics. Dinner progressed with superficial conversation, though I could feel Richard's eyes on me throughout the meal. When Marcus stood to make a toast, praising Meridian's continued growth and innovative direction, he raised his glass in my direction. And to new beginnings and valuable partnerships, he concluded with a meaningful smile. Richard's fork clinked against his plate. I took a sip of water, avoiding his gaze. As dessert was being served, Patricia Locke leaned across the table. Caroline, I'd love to get your thoughts on the Hernandez proposal. Their sustainable energy portfolio aligns with what you were describing earlier. I'd be happy to review it, I replied. Their wind farm technology shows promise, but I have questions about their solar storage patents. Richard's head snapped up. You know about Hernandez Energy? Of course she does, Patricia said before I could answer. Caroline's analysis of emerging green technology investments is impressively thorough. The confusion on Richard's face might have been comical under different circumstances. I don't understand, he said slowly. How are you involved with Meridian's clients? An uncomfortable silence fell over our section of the table. Patricia glanced between us, suddenly realizing she'd stepped into something personal. I think we should continue this at home, I said quietly. The ride home was silent. Richard gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened, but he said nothing until we were inside our house with the door closed behind us. What the hell was that? He demanded, loosening his tie with sharp, angry movements. I set my clutch on the entry table. That was me having a professional conversation about investments. With my colleagues? With my CEO? His voice rose. Since when are you discussing client portfolios with Patricia Locke? Since Marcus approached me about joining Meridian's new, sustainable investment division. Richard stared at me as if I'd started speaking in tongues. What are you talking about? You don't work in finance. You haven't worked anywhere in 20 years. The dismissive tone was familiar, but tonight it didn't diminish me. Tonight, it only highlighted how little attention he'd been paying. Actually, I do work in finance. I've been managing our investment portfolio since your first major bonus 8 years ago. You've been putting money in a savings account, he said dismissively. That's not the same as $2,436,000, I interrupted. That's the current value of the portfolio I've built. It's outperformed the market by an average of 11% annually. Richard's mouth opened, then closed. That's not possible. Not only is it possible, it's documented. Frank Wilson has verified everything. Frank. The betrayal in his voice was rich with irony. My Frank Wilson. Our financial advisor, I corrected. And yes, he's been helping me prepare a complete financial overview. I walked to my home office and returned with the folder Frank had prepared, handing it to Richard. He opened it skeptically, but as he flipped through the pages, his expression shifted from disbelief to astonishment. This is how did you? He stammered, scanning the performance charts and investment summaries. I have an MBA in investment finance from Wharton, I reminded him. The same degree you have. The difference is you've spent 20 years being recognized for yours, while I've spent 20 years watching you forget about mine. Richard looked up from the papers. His face flushed. That's not fair. We agreed you'd stay home with the twins. Yes, we did, and I've never regretted that decision. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as your equal. I became just the nanny in your eyes. He flinched at his own words thrown back at him. That was a stupid comment. I didn't mean. You absolutely meant it, I said calmly. It's how you've thought of me for years. The woman who takes care of your house, your children, your social calendar. Never the woman who put her career on hold to support yours. Never the woman whose financial acumen has doubled your wealth. Richard sank onto the sofa, the folder open on his lap. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything tonight. Just read the reports. We can talk tomorrow. I turned to head upstairs, but his voice stopped me. Are you leaving me? The question hung in the air between us. I considered my answer carefully. I'm not making any decisions tonight, I said finally. But things need to change, Richard. I'm not willing to be invisible anymore. The next morning, I came downstairs to find Richard at the kitchen table, the financial reports spread before him, an empty coffee mug at his elbow. His rumpled appearance suggested he'd been there most of the night. Have you slept at all? I asked, moving to the coffee maker. Not much, he admitted. I've been going through everything. The Nexus biotech investment alone. Caroline, that was brilliant. Most professional analysts missed that opportunity. I poured coffee for both of us, refreshing his mug before sitting across from him. I did my research. Their Phase 2 trial data showed more promise than the market recognized. Richard shook his head, something like wonder in his expression. All these years, while I've been climbing the corporate ladder, you've been quietly outperforming most of Meridian's investment team. I had time to analyze the data carefully, I said. No office politics, no pressure to show quick returns. Still, he insisted, this portfolio would be impressive for anyone. For someone who's been out of the formal financial world for 2 decades, it's extraordinary. He hesitated. Why didn't you tell me? The question was genuine, and I owed him an honest answer. At first, I wasn't sure it would work. I thought I might fail, and I didn't want you to see that. Then, as it started to succeed, I realized I was enjoying having something that was just mine, something I didn't have to explain or justify. And later, I sighed. Later, I realized you had stopped seeing me as a professional equal. Would you have taken investment advice from just the nanny? Richard winced. I deserve that. It's not about what you deserve, I said. It's about what's true. Somewhere in the last 20 years, you stopped seeing me clearly. I became a function in your life rather than a person with my own skills and ambitions. He was quiet for a long moment. And now Marcus wants to hire you. He's made an initial offer. We're scheduled to talk details on Monday. Richard looked up sharply. You'd be working at Meridian? With me. Not with you, I clarified. In a different division, reporting to Patricia. The Sustainable Investment Initiative would be separate from your corporate finance responsibilities. But at the same company. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Isn't that complicated? No more complicated than being introduced as just the nanny at the company Christmas party. Richard had the grace to look ashamed. I've apologized for that. Actually, you haven't, I pointed out. He set down his coffee mug. You're right. I'm sorry, Caroline. That comment was thoughtless and dismissive. I was trying to be, I don't even know, casual? Funny? It was neither. It was disrespectful, and I'm truly sorry. The apology was a start, but 20 years of accumulated slights and oversights couldn't be erased with one conversation. Thank you, I acknowledged. But this isn't just about one comment at one party. It's about how our relationship has evolved or devolved over 2 decades. Richard nodded slowly. I get that. So what happens now? It was the crucial question, and I'd been considering my answer for months. That depends on you, I said carefully. I've decided what I want. I'm going back to finance, whether at Meridian or elsewhere. I've updated my credentials. I've proven my capabilities, and I'm ready for this next chapter. I met his gaze directly. The question is whether you're ready for a wife who's your professional peer, not your support staff. Richard leaned back in his chair, looking genuinely startled by the directness of my challenge. For a man accustomed to being in control, this shifting dynamic was clearly unsettling. Of course I am, he said, but uncertainty tinged his voice. Are you? Because it means real changes, Richard. No more assuming I'll handle all the household management. No more expecting me to organize your social calendar or make excuses to your mother when you work late. I'll be building my own career with all the time demands that entails. He swallowed visibly. That's fair. I can adjust. Can you? I pressed. Because the last time I checked, you don't even know how to schedule your own dentist appointments. Color rose in his cheeks. I can learn. Yes, you can. And you'll need to. I softened my tone slightly. I'm not trying to punish you, Richard. I'm trying to establish a new normal where we're both respected for our full selves. He nodded slowly. I understand, and I want to try. It wasn't the enthusiastic embrace of change I might have hoped for, but it was honest. And honesty was where we needed to start. Over the next week, our home life underwent a seismic shift. I met with Marcus and Patricia on Monday morning and accepted their offer to head Meridian's new sustainable investment initiative. By Monday afternoon, HR had processed my paperwork, and I had an office 3 floors above Richard's. The news spread quickly through the company. Some reacted with surprise, others with curiosity, and a few, particularly the women who had been at Meridian for years, with knowing smiles and quiet congratulations. It's about time, Melanie said when she stopped by my new office. Though I admit, I'm enjoying the expressions on some of the executive team's faces. They don't quite know what to make of this development. Richard included? I asked. Melanie hesitated. He's adjusting. Davis from legal said he walked into a meeting yesterday and announced he needed to reschedule because he had to take his car for an emissions test. I smiled despite myself. Baby steps. At home, the changes were equally pronounced. Richard had hired a housekeeping service without consulting me, his first attempt at taking initiative on home management, and had downloaded a calendar app where he was diligently noting his own appointments. I added the dinner with the Prestons next Friday, he informed me proudly, showing me his phone. And I called to confirm our reservation. That's great, I said, genuinely impressed by his efforts. But the dinner is Thursday, not Friday. His face fell. Oh, I'll change it. These small stumbles were frequent in those early weeks, but I recognized them for what they were. The genuine attempts of a man learning skills he'd never had to develop. There were moments of frustration on both sides, like when he shrank his favorite sweater in the laundry, or when I came home exhausted from a client meeting to find he'd forgotten to defrost anything for dinner. We could order in, he suggested hopefully, or you could learn to plan meals. I countered, but without real heat. The twins called frequently, curious about the changes taking place. James was supportive, but reserved, while Sophia was openly delighted. It's like watching someone in a movie get their big character development moment, she said during a video call. Dad actually asked me how to sort laundry yesterday. Be patient with him, I advised. He's learning. Are you happy, Mom? She asked suddenly. The question made me pause. Was I happy? The past month had been exhausting. Establishing myself at Meridian, navigating a recalibrated marriage, dealing with the gossip and speculation that inevitably followed such a visible shift in dynamics. I'm satisfied, I said finally. I feel like I'm finally being true to myself. Happiness will come. At work, my investment strategy was already showing promise. The sustainable technology fund I was building had attracted attention from several major clients, and Patricia had given me considerable autonomy in shaping the division's direction. Richard and I settled into a new professional rhythm. We drove to work separately most days, ate lunch apart, and maintained appropriate boundaries during office hours. To most observers, we were simply colleagues who happened to be married, though everyone knew our story by now. 6 weeks after I started at Meridian, the company hosted a client appreciation event. Unlike the formal gala or holiday party, this was a more intimate gathering for key clients and the executives who managed their accounts. Richard and I arrived together, but separated almost immediately as we each had different client relationships to nurture. I was deep in conversation with the representatives from Hernandez Energy when I overheard a conversation from the group behind me. "Caldwell's wife is making quite a splash with that green energy fund," a male voice commented. "Caroline," another voice corrected firmly. I recognized it as Richard's. "Her name is Caroline Caldwell, and she's not making a splash. She's built a sustainable investment strategy that's already attracting major institutional clients." I turned slightly, catching Richard's profile as he continued. "And for the record, I'm also her husband. The relationship works both ways." Something warm unfurled in my chest at his words. It was more than the public acknowledgement. It was the genuine respect in his voice. For perhaps the first time in years, he was seeing me clearly and reflecting that vision back to others. Later that evening, as we drove home, I mentioned what I'd overheard. "I meant it," Richard said simply. "I've been watching you these past weeks, not just what you're building professionally, but how you move through the world when you're fully engaged in something that matters to you." He glanced at me briefly before returning his eyes to the road. I'd forgotten what that looked like, or maybe I never properly appreciated it. "Thank you for saying that," I said quietly. "I should have said it years ago," he replied, along with about 1,000 other things. When we arrived home, rather than heading straight upstairs as had become our habit, Richard gestured to the living room. "Can we talk for a few minutes?" We sat on opposite ends of the sofa, a physical distance that reflected the emotional journey we were still navigating. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Richard began. "About us, about the last 20 years, about how we got here." I waited, giving him space to continue. "When we met, I admired your intelligence, your drive, your financial insight. That's not flattery, it's fact. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing those qualities in you. Not because they disappeared, but because I stopped looking." He leaned forward, clasping his hands between his knees. I got comfortable with our arrangement. Too comfortable. I liked having the supportive wife who handled everything at home while I played the important executive. It was convenient, and over time, I started to believe that was who you actually were, just the support system for my success. The raw honesty of his self-assessment surprised me. This was a level of introspection I hadn't seen from Richard in years. "I've been unfair to you," he continued, "not just in what I said at that Christmas party, but in how I've thought about you, talked about you, and taken you for granted. And I'm sorry, Caroline. Truly sorry." "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "But what now? Apologies are important, but they don't change anything unless behavior changes too." Richard nodded. "I know. That's why I've been working with a coach." "A coach?" "An executive coach who specializes in work-life balance and relationship dynamics," he explained. "Melanie recommended him. I've been meeting with him twice a week for the past month." I was stunned. Richard had always dismissed therapy or coaching as unnecessary, something for people who couldn't solve their own problems. That's unexpected. "I needed help," he said simply. "I don't want to lose you, Caroline. Not as my wife, not as the mother of our children, and not as the brilliant woman I married. I want us to find a way forward that honors who you are now, not who I conveniently thought you were." His sincerity was unmistakable. This wasn't the quick, defensive apology he'd offered that first night, but something more substantial, a recognition of deeper patterns and a commitment to addressing them. "I want that too," I admitted, "but it won't be easy. We've fallen into these roles for 2 decades. "I know, but I'm willing to do the work if you are." I considered his words. The past 6 weeks had been transformative professionally, but our personal relationship remained in flux, cautious, tentative, each of us feeling our way through unfamiliar terrain. "I am," I said finally, "but I need you to understand something important. I'm never going back to being invisible. Not at home, not at work, not anywhere." "I wouldn't want you to," Richard said, and for the first time in months, I fully believed him. The woman you are now, the one who commands respect in board meetings and builds innovative investment strategies, that's the woman I want to be married to. He shifted closer on the sofa, reaching for my hand. I just need to become the kind of man who deserves her. I allowed my fingers to intertwine with his. You were that man once, I reminded him. You can be again. 6 months later, Meridian hosted its annual Christmas party. Once again, we gathered at the Blackwell Hotel, under the same crystal chandeliers that had witnessed Richard's careless comment a year earlier. But everything else had changed. I stood near the bar, champagne in hand, chatting with Patricia about our division's latest acquisition when Marcus Bennett approached with a small group of board members. Gentlemen, Marcus said, I'd like to introduce you to Caroline Caldwell, the architect of our Sustainable Investment Initiative. In just 6 months, Caroline has built a $300 million portfolio that's already showing returns well above industry average. As I shook hands and fielded questions about investment strategy and market projections, I spotted Richard across the room. He was watching me with unmistakable pride, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Later, as we mingled with colleagues, a new executive who had recently joined from a competitor firm turned to Richard. And what does your wife do, Caldwell? Is she in finance as well? Richard's smile was genuine as he turned to include me in the conversation. Actually, my wife is Caroline Caldwell, head of Meridian's Sustainable Investment Division. She's revolutionizing how we approach environmental impact investing. His eyes met mine, warm with respect and something deeper. I'm just the husband. The executive laughed, assuming it was a joke, but I knew better. In those 4 words, an echo and reversal of last year's dismissal, was everything we had worked through: recognition, respect, and the rebirth of a partnership between equals. As we drove home that night, snow beginning to dust the roads, Richard reached across the console to take my hand. Happy, he asked simply. I thought about the journey of the past year, from invisible to essential, from overlooked to respected, about the marriage we were rebuilding, day by day, on a foundation of mutual recognition and genuine partnership. Yes, I said, squeezing his hand. I'm happy. It wasn't perfect. We still had moments of friction as we navigated our dual-career household. Richard still occasionally fell into old patterns, and I sometimes pushed too hard against them. But we were moving forward together, each fully seen by the other. The portfolio I'd built continued to grow, now approaching $3 million. But the true investment had been in myself, in reclaiming my identity, my professional passion, and my rightful place as an equal partner in every sense of the word. I was no longer just the nanny, the wife, or the support system. I was Caroline Caldwell, in full and finally recognized. And that recognition, hard-won and complete, was worth more than any financial return could ever be.